Hello, this is Abby.
Dear Abby, this is gonna be a long one.
Oh boy.
Dear Abby, how do you tell the difference between a new exciting crush and a rebound?
Does it matter?
Dear Abby.
Dear Abby.
Dear Abby.
Welcome to our little corner of the internet. This is the Dear Abby podcast. I hope you stay and hang out with us. See you in a sec. Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of Dear Abby. I am your host and welcome back. I hope everybody is having a fantastic day if you're in the car or listening at work or wherever. As always, thank you so much for listening to my little podcast. Thank you very much. Today we are talking about hidden compulsions or just hidden and less talked about symptoms of OCD. I wanted to focus specifically on hidden compulsions or less commonly talked about compulsions, as well as less commonly talked about intrusive thoughts or intrusive images, and also just obsessions and fears and how sometimes those come up or manifest. I wanted to share some of those compulsions and symptoms that I've had that go along those lines that I didn't know was OCD, because there's a lot of stuff online that said you have to wash your hands, you have to check everything, like specifically the stove, make sure the sink isn't running, touch everything as you walk by. I grew up watching Monk, which he had, I believe, OCD. And I think sometimes it was accurate, but it also, that's just what I thought it was the very specific physical compulsive things that I would see people do. And so I didn't know that OCD is also a lot of other things that come out in different ways, or that, yeah. So I think it's very important that we acknowledge the full spectrum and the full experience of OCD and stop kind of pushing it into one corner. And I do believe that we're moving in the right direction, but I think there's still a lot of things that aren't talked about with it, and maybe not brought to awareness as much as would be helpful, if that made any sense. I just know that when I was younger or growing up, if my family or I knew, I think, more about what OCD actually was, and I heard real stories of people with OCD and people who understood it, and therapists and psychologists who understood it express it, I would have possibly been able to get help earlier, and it would have been a lot easier to overcome a lot of the things that I deal with now. So I do think it's very important. I have been struggling a lot lately with my OCD. I've been out of therapy for a while now because of insurance problems, and at first I felt very empowered, and I still sometimes do, but I think I still really need help still, because I can feel embarrassed by it, or I can just admit that sometimes OCD still tricks me, and then I realize that I'm stuck in a loop, and it's still hard for me to let go of. Because as weird as it sounds, it's not necessarily a symptom, but you wouldn't think that you would miss some of the safety behaviors when you're recovering, but when you've done those like your whole life, it feels so vulnerable and uncomfortable to not use those, because you have to kind of rebuild a lot of things, and that's very stressful and hard. But it's worth it. It's worth all the hard work and the uncomfortable feelings, but you have to go through that part of it and keep going through that part of it. So I don't have a lot of life updates, and so that means we're jumping right on into the meat of today's episode. First, let's talk about some common but maybe less talked about or less understood ways that you can experience your fears and obsessions, and how those kind of come about. And again, I think this is really important for knowledge of OCD, because the more you know and understand the disorder, the more tools and the more understanding you will have, and more power over it that you will have. So educating yourself about it and all of its tricks and the annoying stuff that it does is extremely beneficial. So I think it's very important to understand all the ways it can come up. And I think it just gives you more clarity on where the lines are, because if you've had OCD your whole life or for, 20 plus years, the lines sometimes feel blurred. And it's almost uncomfortable saying that because I don't want the intrusive thoughts or anything, but sometimes if I feel numb to it, or if I still struggle with some ruminating, then it almost feels like I want it because I can't stop thinking about it. And so that's just like it feels very complex and messy, but the more you understand about what OCD does and how it tricks you and how it can come up, I just think the more power and clarity that you have and the less shame you will carry. And that's a major factor, at least it was for me and is still for me. The first thing that I didn't know about OCD, obsessions and fears, is they can come about in thoughts of command. And so if I always thought it was like, I thought that intrusive thoughts always had to be what if. Like it had to be a specific thought of it started with what if blank. Because that's just like what I would see. That's what I would hear. Like what if, and they can. And that's very common as well. But I didn't know that they could come as commands. And so it's like you have these internal commands. I feel a little bit like hesitant ever to share that because it can, if you don't understand the disorder, it can sound alarming. To be clear, I don't want to do the commands. It's not something that aligns with who I am. It's just, they just randomly come. I've heard people describe when you're driving on a bridge and it's like, drive off the bridge. And that's the thought. It's like, hey, go do that now. It feels like it's like a command, like you have to go do it. That can be very triggering. That can be very intrusive and disturbing and frustrating if you keep getting that over and over and over again. And it can feel very defeating because it's exhausting when your mind is like playing tricks on you like that. You don't want to do it, but it's just still spouting out stuff. That's something I didn't know, but that has happened to me. That's kind of how it started. Was one of my first intrusive thoughts felt like a command, and that just was horrifying for me. So if you have that experience, again, to reiterate, these are not things that you want to do. And if you have OCD, your next thought might be, well, what if like I want to do them? And what if, how can you know if I don't want to, how do I know if I don't want to do it? Like, why would I? That is the exact loop that's keeping you stuck, is trying to figure that out. So you just have to sit with the uncomfortable feeling of like, I'm not sure why they pop in. Before we continue, just as a disclaimer, I'm not a therapist. This is not a replacement for any therapy or medical advice. I am not a professional. This is just my personal experience and things that I've learned through therapy and books and podcasts and listening to experts. But I am not one of those experts. I am just listening to other people's research and their knowledge. So if I read from something, I'll definitely source it. But most of this is just going to be my experience, and then maybe some things that I found like on when I looked for other people's experiences with random symptoms of OCD and stuff. I remember what it was like when I was in bad OCD land, when I was really struggling with my OCD, and I just would get triggered by other people's triggers, basically, and even hearing about it kind of set me off. So if that's your experience and you don't feel like you have the tools, there's no shame in it. Genuinely, you don't have to listen to anything if you feel like you don't have the tools. Or even if you've just already done exposures and you're exhausted and you're like, I don't think I can handle anymore, then you can trust yourself. And, another thing is twitching or like weird physical sensations. So these would come with thoughts like, what if you just stab that person or something? Or like, a lot of harm thoughts. Those really scared me at the beginning. I would get a thought and then like my hand would twitch or my eye would twitch or some weird physical thing, like my stomach would growl or something. And for some reason that also triggered more obsessive thinking about like, well, why did it just twitch? What does that mean? And blah, blah, blah. Does that mean I actually want to do it? What does that mean? And it would be like it'd be a whole thing. So that was also very common with me that I never really heard other people talk about that much. I heard it one time on one podcast. I have heard this one a lot, but intrusive images. But the images usually accompany feelings. So if it's like an inappropriate image of, whatever usually your obsession is, that will not necessarily feel like a whole thought, like a sentence, but it'll just instill a yucky feeling or disturbing. And then my thoughts might be, you're sick. Why did you think that? Why are you thinking that? What does that mean about you? That type of a connection. But the images can sometimes, I remember telling my therapist at the beginning, sometimes my images in my head are more visceral, and like the images felt so real. And they were so, like, I have a fantastic imagination, okay? And OCD is the master of using everything against us. And so I'll imagine something and I'll be thinking about something, and OCD will somehow turn it into like a horrifying image. And I'm like, get it out, like get this image out. For a lot of people, for people that do not have OCD, that might happen. They're like, oh, that was weird. Then they move on. For people with OCD, that doesn't go away fast. And it keeps coming and coming. And that uncomfortable sensation, it keeps coming and coming and coming. It is not fun. All of these things are hard and they're scary. And when you're in it, it's so scary and it's so hard and can feel really confusing and really deflating and really difficult to believe that you're not the monster that OCD is telling you to. So that's when you have to trust like that 1% of you, or when you have to trust your therapist or your family or the people that you love, or just in something, that 1%, and then let that work in you and let that be enough. Sometimes I just feel bad if it's too like doomsday or sad about what I'm saying, but that's just the reality of where someone can be with OCD. So I just want to give some hopeful tad bits in there that you don't have to be stuck. And even if you have these things and they feel so scary and real, like you can get, you 100% can get better. Another thing is intense mental sensations. Sometimes that can just be feeling dizzy. And sometimes that can be like how if you're fearful of being lost or alone or something, sometimes feeling dizzy or disoriented is so triggering. At least for me it is. Anyway, so like random mental sensations or physical sensations like that of feeling like dizzy or lightheaded or like you're going to throw up, and different things can be a way that I think your fears can come up. They might not just be thoughts, like specific thoughts, but they do still attach to your fears. And I think with the help of a therapist or with a professional, or just a really good book that you have that has like a worksheet on how to do it if you don't have the funds, I genuinely believe that you can do a lot without a therapist with all of the resources that there are online and the books and everything like that. One of the best books for that, by the way, if you can't afford therapy and you want to get started, is Freedom from Obsessive Compulsive Disorder, but I can't remember. I think Jonathan Greyson. And that's a great book. He gives you a worksheet. You can do a hierarchy. That book, I think, like actually started to change my life. That book is great for doing the work, like actually doing the work. I think there's a lot of philosophical things you can read and life perspectives that you can shift and everything like that. And I think that is a big, important part of the work. But also a huge part is just understanding your OCD and what even is it right now for you? What is it? Because it's not just a word, it's actually something that's happening. So then it has all these worksheets that when you fill it in and you create it, it's very digestible and makes you feel like you actually have a plan. This is I go to therapy is the Instagram, and Treat My OCD. It says I go to therapy X Treat My OCD. So I think they're both, I don't know if it was a collab or something, but it was just like a cute little post, and it says common types of intrusive thoughts. Commands like jump or throw your phone. It says common from Treat My OCD, which I believe is no CD. So they do a lot of research and work with a lot of people who really understand OCD. And these are saying that they're common. So I don't want to reassure your OCD because that's not helpful. But sometimes I do think for me, it's important to know. It's just reassuring to me, not my OCD, if that makes sense. You're not alone. OCD might trick you and say you're the only one that's how it's manifesting, so it's probably not real. But I promise you that is also a lie. Okay, doubts about your past events or your memories. Example, did I do something horrible last night? Yeah, you can have basically false memory or doubts about past experiences, or did I do something, or did I think something? Sometimes it can be something, even did I think something bad last night, and then you have to retroactively try to fix it or clean yourself from it. And it can be very exhausting and confusing and create a lot of shame that just doesn't need to be there, but that is common. So just doubts. And okay, based on magical thinking, example, if I don't do this thing, then something bad will happen. An even more specific example, if I don't pray for every single one of my family members and feel like I care about them when I pray, then that means the person that I don't feel the best about when I pray, that's something bad's going to happen to them. Obviously, it was specific because that's how I used to think sometimes as well about my stuffed animals. I had stuffed animals when I was a little girl, and if I didn't close the closet before getting in bed and cuddling one of my stuffed animals, because I had like a line of them, I would feel like they were mad at me, and I didn't want that. And I was also scared that something bad would happen to me if I did. I don't know if I was scared by Toy Story or something, but I just remember just weird stuff like that where I was like, I have to make sure they don't see, or I have to make sure I do an order and I don't sleep with I don't sleep with the same one twice in a row, because then that'll be bad. I wanted everyone to be happy and everything to be fair, okay? But as a little girl, that's how it showed up. But now I think there's different ways of like magical thinking. Like a common one that I hear is if there's a tragedy in the world, somehow you think it's related to you or something that you did or something that you can control. That ties into a lot of like hyper responsibility that we feel when we have OCD, and it's really hard for us to let that go because it feels irresponsible. But like, you didn't cause like the tragedies of life, you know? It's inevitable, and that's just not our problem to fix. You can be such a good person and empathetic and sensitive and caring, but it doesn't mean that you have to literally carry the weight of the world on your shoulders, because you can't really do anything with that except for become most likely depressed and be in OCD loops. This is a classic one. What if sentences like, what if I left the oven on? Which I laugh because what ifs are just so annoying. Like really think about how annoying what ifs are. You're like, da 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 da, minding your day. What if I didn't turn off the stove and my house burns down and everything that I have worked for just comes burning down, and then that just keeps escalating? You know, and then the thought keeps escalating, and then me and my husband are fighting, and then we get a divorce, and then our kids have to decide. It's like, that's not even happening. That's actually not happening right now. So goodbye. Something that I think I had to learn the hard way, and I'm now remembering that I've been not doing, is recognizing that just because you're worrying about something doesn't mean that you're doing anything, and also doesn't mean you're more compassionate or sensitive to something because you're obsessively worrying about it. That's sometimes I think where my OCD pulls in. Like, I like to be sensitive and I like to give people space for all feelings, like good, bad, ugly, pretty, like all of it. And I think sometimes OCD uses that value of mine to be empathetic and kind of uses it against me to where I feel compelled to, you know, do all of these unnecessarily exhausting, worrying, ruminating cycles. So I think sometimes it's helpful to flip that to where it's actually extremely compassionate and empathetic and understanding, to set a boundary mentally for yourself to where you don't have to solve those things, and you also don't have to worry about everything. It's okay. I know if it's been a pattern your whole life, it's okay to let that pattern go. Like, and it's going to be hard and it's going to be a practice, but you're not selfish for not worrying so much about everything. Worry and care are like not the same thing, especially obsessive worrying. Obsessively worrying and care are not the same thing. Being concerned and wanting to help and actionable concern is helpful. But obsessively worrying, ruminating, triple, quadruple checking is not doesn't equal more care, which sometimes can be hard to hear, because if we've done that our whole life and that's what we've labeled it as, it's kind of hard to like think about that. Okay. Sorry, went on a tangent with that one. Vivid mental images, which I talked about, of something disturbing, inappropriate, or otherwise unwanted. I want statements about things that go against your actual desires. I want to kick that animal. I have definitely experienced those as well. Those are scarier to me than urges than commands, because that freaks me out, because then I feel like I have to go back and say like, no, I don't want that. And I feel like I have to go back in my memory and think of all the times I didn't do something bad. There's a compulsion for you. Next one, statements about you as a person, such as, I am a bad person. Black and white thinking, probably about yourself. Statements about other people, like she is cheating on me or nobody likes me. And predictions about future events, like something terrible will happen. So those are a bunch of the intrusive thoughts, fears, obsessions. Those are a bunch of the intrusive thoughts that can pop up connected to fears or obsessions that you might have. There's definitely other ones that I'm not thinking of, and I'd like to say, if you have other ones that are popping in your head, well, she didn't say this. You're right, I did not say that, but I don't know what that means. That doesn't necessarily mean that no one else has ever experienced it. A lot of people could have experienced it genuinely, and I just maybe not have said it, and that could just be the reality. So, okay, and then here are some more hidden like compulsions that we can do that maybe I don't hear about a lot. And this is from Treat My OCD, as well as Katie's Self-Care Diaries on Instagram. Mentally repeating words or sentences. I've talked about this a lot. I do this, and I still sometimes do this, and it's really, really scary and hard not to do this, because I think it's just a way of suppressing, and almost like there's someone yelling and then you just try to yell louder. It's like if you're watching a YouTube video or reels and someone else's, and then you guys are competing, so you just turn the volume higher and higher. That's how it feels in your head, and it's very annoying. But it's obviously hard to stop, because that's what OCD is. It's hard to stop. That's where you would have already stopped. Overthinking to figure it out. Figure it out. Figure it out. The famous figure it out, like the continuous loop of figuring things out, which I'm not going to get into. I've gone into a million times. But yeah, that's tale as old as time with that one. Extreme measures to prevent harm to yourself or others. Example, hiding sharp objects, hiding pictures, avoiding even looking at social media because you're scared of what might pop up and that might trigger some thoughts or something. Obviously, avoidance is not helpful for recovery, and it might feel better because you're not having to be triggered and you might feel safer, but pretty soon you're going to be stuck in a tiny, tiny, tiny world where you can't do anything because you're too scared to do anything. Trying to force thoughts out of your head. That's a classic. I feel like some people that don't have OCD can get away with doing that every once in a while, but especially if you have OCD, this is one sure way to get that to be a continuous thing that happens and it comes back louder and louder. Okay, seeking reassurance. This says hidden, but these aren't necessarily hidden. But I will say with seeking reassurance specifically, how do I say this? I can be a little bit, sometimes without being aware of it, I am asking for reassurance, but I'm not saying it like, do you love me? ? Because that's plainly reassurance. But it can come out as like a sideways way of asking for reassurance. And it can look like monitoring your partner's behaviors, monitoring how you feel about your partner's behaviors, monitoring every tiny thing that they say to get like a reassurance that they do love you. It's probably in an extremely frustrating and possibly hurtful way for the other person, because you might just be more critical, and it might just, that person might not ever feel like anything they're doing is enough to like reassure you. And that's a sure sign that it is an OCD issue. If no matter what that no matter what you do, or no matter what you ask, no matter how much you look for something or ask something, it never satisfies that feeling. That's an OCD issue. Like, obviously, this is if you've been diagnosed with OCD and that's something that you already know you have. And then also if you have a partner or a spouse or a friend, family member that has OCD and they feel like they're fishing for something, or they feel like, or they just are hurtful to you because they might make you feel like nothing you do is enough. Like, no matter how many times you say, yes, I love you, or no, I don't think that, this is how I think. Every time that they get that reassurance from you, it doesn't satisfy them, and they just ask for more and more and more eventually. It may satisfy for the second. Like, it might just like be fine for a second or for a day or for a week or a month or something, but then it just is gonna keep coming back. The last couple of things is checking bodily sensations. This is probably common for all obsessions and themes, but for health, OCD, and anything sexual, sometimes a lot of like groinal checking or bodily sensations for health, like checking your heart, if you can hear your heartbeat, if it feels normal, checking your neck, checking your temperature, checking, like just doing a body scan multiple times a day. That could be a common compulsion that you do. And then the last one that this graphic says is reviewing memories to check for warning signs. This one, I would hear people talk about false memory or checking memories and even real event OCD, and I never really understood fully. Like, I just always heard that and was like, okay, yeah, like I kind of understand maybe, but I never really experienced it until the past probably 6 months. And I did actually an episode on false memory OCD, and what my experience has been lately a little bit, but my behaviors just turned into reviewing memories. And maybe if I can think of the exact right memory that's making me feel traumatized or something, then I can fix like all of my bad feelings. And then it'll be easy to do the things that I want to do then. Or like everything will make sense and everything will be, all bad feelings and bad things will be gone. I also think this can be a huge thing if you have relationship OCD. You can be anxious about your relationship or obsessive about if they're right for you, if they're red flag, green flag, all those things that you kind of see on social media that are a lot of the times taken out of context, and they don't get a lot of information. They're just very black and white, like bullet points, which a lot of those things can trigger reviewing memories of you and your partner, specifically thinking of, okay, let's think back to the beginning. How did he treat me? Let's think back to this. What did he say to me here? And you're reviewing all of these memories to check for warning signs for your relationship. Like, is that a good memory? Should I have seen something then that I didn't see? And this isn't like a helpful reviewing of memory, because sometimes when you are in a relationship and you're maybe thinking about getting serious, you do think back and like, okay, let's like think about our relationship and let's review and kind of just ponder and think about stuff to make sure we're making the right decision. And then you do, and you move on. But when it's with OCD, it's constant. It feels like a constant urge to figure something out within those memories. And like there's a missing piece of the puzzle that if you just find, then everything will be fixed. Yeah, it can be extremely frustrating, because you might think, remember, and then you're not even closer to getting any answers. And you're also further away from your partner, probably because you're remembering bad things that they did. And so now you're like thinking of all the negative things that your partner did or said, which makes you mad again, or like, I don't know. A lot of nothing really good. Nothing good comes from that. So those are some of the hidden compulsions that people do that I've done for sure. And there's a lot more, a lot more. Those are just some. So we'll probably do this in another episode. to inform and just bring awareness to people's experiences with OCD and ways that you can help. I also don't know if I said this at the beginning, but obviously, or maybe not obviously, compulsions are what keep you stuck in this obsessive loop. And they're probably pushing you further from what you really want to do and who you want to be and the life that you want to live. And you might just be living out of fear. And to that, I say, you're not alone. I think there's a lot of people that live out of fear and get help, and then they don't have to live like that anymore. Again, I mentioned the book before, but after talking about all of these obsessions and compulsive behaviors, I want to reiterate that if you don't have the money or the funds or insurance for OCD treatment, if you think you have OCD, the book Freedom from Obsessive Compulsive Disorder, I believe is what it's called, by Jonathan Greyson. It's actually on Spotify if you have Spotify Premium. However, they don't give you a lot of reading hours, which is kind of annoying. So that's kind of annoying, but they also have it on audiobook. You can order it off on Amazon. You can print out the worksheets. They'll have the worksheets in the book if you order it, I believe. And this is a great start to working on your OCD and really starting to get help for yourself. Even if you don't feel like you deserve the help, just start to do it anyways. And then your life will turn around and you'll start to feel more like yourself again. And so reclaim your power and don't be scared to do it because of the lies that OCD has probably fed you about the kind of person that you are. Okay, well, we aren't necessarily doing a Dear Abby today, but the next question that I got was from somebody asking about what it's like to get married after a divorce, but on Keaton's end. So from his perspective, getting married to somebody who's been divorced, I think sometimes it creates more shame or weird feelings when you act like that's not the reality. But the reality is I was married before and didn't think I was going to get a divorce. And then I did, and then met Keaton and we dated for a couple of years and then we got married. So I know what he would say. We've talked about it before, all of that kind of relationship stuff. But for whoever was asking that, I will have Keaton come on sometime and just speak specifically to that. But I want to have it more prepared, and also when he's able to hop on the podcast again. But I will try to do that next week. So that'll be our Dear Abby, is him talking about his side of that experience of being married to me. I thought it was a really good question and I definitely want to cover it, but he's not able to join this week, but he will be able to next week. And so we can talk about all of that stuff. That is it for today's episode. I hope you guys enjoyed this little debrief, because I did. I think a lot of these reminders are really helpful for me to stop gaslighting myself into thinking that I don't have OCD anymore. I hope you guys have a great weekend. If you guys ever want to game with me, just hit me up on Instagram and ask me. I might be shy at first because I'm always insecure and have a little bit of social fears when it comes to playing video games with people. So it sounds nice now, but I know when someone messages me, I'll feel insecure and I will want to say no, because I'll be scared that what if they don't like me, or what if we play and I say something that they get offended by or something, and I joke around too much or something that they don't understand. And then I feel like a jerk and an idiot. Love you guys. Bye. 우회전 taking a ride to journey 눈치 보면서 들어가야 할 때 찾아 나머진 바빠 개설레임 바꾸는 사람들